Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Biotech Project. We have an incredible episode coming up today. I can't wait to get through the intro and have John introduce you to our guest today. So let's get into the intro.
You want to break into and navigate your career in the pharma and biotech industry. We know how to teach you. This is the Biotech Project. From sales to medical affairs and everything in between, we're talking about it. No matter how you got here, from here to your next role is up to you, and we're here to help. You'll hear from guests in every role, from CEO to sales, recruiters to hiring managers. The Biotech Project. Here are your hosts, Scott Resnick and Dr. John Walsh.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of the Biotech Project. Today we are really excited about the guest that we're bringing you today. As our intro says, we speak to everyone from the C-suite and all the way through the entire gamut of those in the biopharma industry. So today we bring to you Shawn Singh. And Shawn is the CEO of VistaGen. He's been with the company since 2009. Has had multiple stints within industry. Recently, the president of Artemis prior to the acquisition, and really interesting in addition to the fact that Shawn is the CEO of VistaGen, his background is also different than some of the guests that we've spoken to before. So we'd really love to learn more about his background, and we'd really love to find out what's going on at VistaGen and some of the work that's there. So maybe without any further ado, Shawn, I'd love to turn it over to you. And maybe you could tell us briefly a little bit about you and your background and why VistaGen.
Well, great. Hey, thanks a lot, Scott, John. It's a pleasure to speak with you and your listeners. My background over the last 30 some odd years in and around biotech, it's a bit different, I think, than many. I cut my teeth in big law back in the early 90s at Silicon Valley offices of Morrison & Forster. And as a young associate, when you're trying to build 3,600 hours a year, you get a pretty broad variety of matters to work on. Back then, it was split pretty much 50-50, biotech, high tech. And I was writing prospectuses, doing diligence, and really developed an affinity for the content of the biotech side. And especially the fundamental point that I knew someday, although it wasn't going to be if I stayed in big law, I would hopefully have a family and have a long-term marriage. Both of those have been accomplished. So I realized, I like to be able to tell my kids I'm doing something beyond myself, that we can certainly, you have to make money, but you also want to be able to help people. And what I saw emerging at that time in the early days of the biotech sector was really exciting. I mean, these things were cutting edge. You got to be surrounded by tremendously smart people, constantly doctors, scientists, PhDs. And it just was, it was a natural move. So there was a company that I worked on their IPO, a biotech company, billed an obscene amount of money to the company as an associate at the law firm, and went to the CEO and said, look, I can save you 10x easily if you bring me in-house. And so I went in-house, went to the business development track. Didn't really know anything about that. I knew how to do deals. Stayed there for 7 years or so, and rose up through the ranks, ended up leaving as chief business officer. And that was on the other side of really the kind of the second catalyst, which was midlife crisis at 36. I had developed, while slogging around New York, trying to raise $1 million, and fortunately got it in knee-deep snow from New York Life to keep that company going. I developed what ended up being necrotizing fasciitis, the flesh-eating bacteria. And here I am with, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and another on the way. And that was a real scary time. And that was, nearly 20 days in the ICU, and came out of that experience just amazed by the power of medicine, the power of healthcare system, the power of surgeons, the power of everything. That miracle really fortified the focus, which then went towards, look, I don't want to be running around anymore, dealing with the then buy side, sell side. And so I moved over to the venture capital arena and the contract research arena. And I developed with partners of founders of Cato Research, a CRO, Cato BioVentures. And that was a model where we innovated to leverage service sector revenues to develop equity positions across a range of companies that we thought were really interesting in the space, especially those that would follow our plans as a contract research organization. So I stayed with there several years. The deal always was if I saw something, any company in that portfolio that really piqued my interest, that I'd be able to go and work with that company full time. There was an opportunity here at VistaGen. At that time, the focus was mostly on stem cell technology back in the early days when it wasn't really, as you probably know, Scott, wasn't a lot of sponsorship out there. It was antithetical to most models to even say you were in stem cell. But that advanced, we ended up licensing from VistaGen the cardiac stem cell technology to Bayer and Blue Rock. But really around early on, it made it very clear that we needed as a company assets, small molecule assets to develop. And one of the opportunities that we had was in the CNS arena. And that really advanced. And then there were some innovations in depression with ketamine therapy and some NIH data. And all of a sudden, this confluence of emphasis around mental health, CNS, really underserved therapeutic areas for a lot of reasons you probably know in CNS and mental health in particular. It's kind of lagged historically behind other sectors for a lot of reasons. We can unpack those later. But anyway, I saw the opportunity at VistaGen really to work with some incredible experts and develop medicines that were faster acting. People need to know sooner than later whether what they're trying to get a benefit from therapeutically has actually got a shot at doing that. And you might know the current antidepressants, John, I'm sure you know, they take forever. And you got about a 1 in 3 shot of them working first time use. And all along the way, you have to deal with side effects. So what we are working on now fits into the slot that I had always hoped for and opportunities came along to have some pipeline assets that have potential to work fast without all the baggage you typically see. So VistaGen today is really what I probably didn't know it 30 years ago, but it fits exactly what I wish I would have told myself 30 years ago I should have found earlier than now, but better late than never.
It's interesting because hearing about the story of what you talked about with regards to the need for these medications, there's this interesting post-COVID phenomenon amongst certain organizations that they never could have seen happening, where the COVID pandemic has opened up a real need for certain treatments, whether they were the vaccine arena, which, we all saw. But I think one of the biggest ones that we're seeing is the need for treatments for depression and anxiety. So I think that, it'd be interesting to hear as you tell us a little bit about what's going on, how that is affecting your approach to things too, because I think you hit on a couple of really key things. You need good therapies that act fast with lower side effects, and I know personally that in the antidepressive arena, I mean, those 3 things, none of them are hit. So
Yeah.
I'm super excited to hear some more about that.
Yeah, part of my own journey is my dad's own lifelong struggles with depression. So it's hit as close to home as it can get, short of your child being affected. But no, you're right on it. I mean, while the pandemic didn't bring about the current national mental health crisis, it certainly has magnified it. And we know that there are still alarming rates of anxiety and depression, uniquely those two, but those are typically the match set that unfortunately leads to suicidality and other really scary consequences. Whenever there's uncertainty, there's anxiety, and often what follows persistent anxiety is depression. And what we've had with the pandemic is tremendous and continuing uncertainty. When we know something is going to end, we can typically muscle through it. Our brains can adjust and rewire and focus on trying to deal with that challenge. And we all need some anxiety. It's not zero anxiety goal here. We need enough anxiety to be energized and focused. So there's sort of normal anxiety, right? And you don't want to run into a street in front of a bus. You don't want to challenge a barking dog, but you don't need it to be more than a little uncomfortable, to impair the way that you function, the way that you embrace people or situations. Social anxiety disorder is a gigantic issue, the third most common mental health disorder. But one, I guess it's always hard to find a way to justify a silver lining of this pandemic. But if I had to give you one, it would be that it has raised awareness. It has destigmatized mental illness a lot. Long way to go. Still needs to become on parity with physical health. And we're not there yet, right? There's always been a persistent stigma. One of the reasons why there's been a lag in development of these kinds of medicines over time is the stigma. And patients don't always have large advocacy groups around them. But COVID has given people and generally society an obvious reason to be affected, right? There's the diverse impacts of the COVID pandemic and then everything that happened during it, right? The civil unrest, George Floyd, the political unrest, then all the economic disruption, the self-isolation, the academic disruption, the employment disruption. I mean, it's really it's just a bad recipe for this market, which is accretive. It continues to get bigger and bigger as things go forward. But the other part of it is, again, so it's okay more to talk about mental illness and having challenges. But I think there's also some increased access to mental health care, not necessarily medication, but certainly more talk therapy. And whether it's online with your primary care physician or existing psychiatrist or psychologist, or sometimes it's even a new engagement that is solely online. I mean, there's a little bit of debate now about whether in person versus online for new engagements. Not sure the jury's in on that one yet, but in terms of being able to privately talk with someone like you, John, as a PCP or an NP, I think the telehealth opportunities from even existing managed care it's been a blessing for people, especially when you have to be self-isolated, right? So,
Absolutely.
we'll see how that goes. I hope it continues to be the case that we get to talk more about mental illness, that we raise it. There's a lot of celebrity impact here. Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles, you unfortunately see the tragedies too. The Robin Williams and Judd and others that Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade. There's those tragedies too that crystallize thinking. But at the end of the day, we need to keep talking, but we also need some new meds. We need some meds that just don't cause you to worry, like with a benzo, that you're going to be addicted, that you're going to have your cognition impaired, that you're going to have your functioning when you need to do your job impaired. So standard of care isn't great. And now more than ever, we need to really fundamentally improve the options for patients. And whether that's through talking or medicine, or both, I think it's both. There's never one size fits all for depression or anxiety. That's why you see a lot of rinse and repeat with the current drugs, right? Unfortunately, like I said, you have a 1 in 3 shot if you're starting to take an antidepressant, the current SSRIs and SNRIs. You learn in about 6 to 10 weeks whether it'll work. If it doesn't work, which is 2 out of 3 people, you wash out. You're still depressed. And you got to wait for another shot, different dose of the same med or a different med. And now you go through that same process again. And we need to make these lives that are impossible possible. And
absolutely.
I think we can get there.
There's so many experiences that I've had, as a clinician prescribing to patients, where people are desperate for a solution, right? They're desperate for improvement. And to your point, Shawn, they're just waiting and waiting for that to happen. And while they're waiting, they might be experiencing a collection of side effects as well. So I think you're exactly right. We do need new things. And that's why it's so exciting about what your company is doing, because not only is there something else coming, but it's novel, right? I mean, the new compound of the pherines that you're moving forward, certainly really, really exciting. Plus, you have a unique route of administration relative to a lot of the other products that are out there as well, it looks. So,
Right.
love to learn a little bit more about the compound, to whatever you can share with us.
Absolutely. No, my pleasure. You are right. I mean, the existing medicines, antidepressants, SSRIs, SNRIs, there's three of those approved. In particular, our context for our lead pherine is social anxiety disorder, which sucks. It's SAD sucks big time.
Love the mug.
And this is a disorder as are other mental illnesses, but this is one that's marked by profound fear and anxiety about being humiliated or embarrassed or judged in what most of us consider common everyday social and performance situations. So it's a very broad range. If you look at the diaries from our clinical studies, everything from sitting in a classroom worried about getting called on, making a presentation to your peers, going on a date, talking to your boss for a raise, eating alone in a food court, going to your neighbors for a barbecue and a ball game. I mean, it's really haunting the types of triggers that are so common and so prevalent that really make self-isolation and opportunity cost the consequences of having the disorder. And then normally the onset is in adolescence, so it's anywhere between 8 and 15 typically, and it's a chronic disorder. The mean duration is about 20 years. So only through a lot of exposure, success, combined with talk therapy, combined with medication, do you ultimately over time hopefully try to knock down those triggers and the impact of those triggers. So what do you get today to use for social anxiety disorder? There's three antidepressants that are approved, all old school drugs. This being more episodic, patients don't tend to like to be on antidepressants chronically because they still have the side effects, and they don't have what they need when they need it. So what is needed is what we think our drug PH94B has tremendous potential based on phase 2. The phase 2 program was highly statistically significant. It was P.002 on the public speaking challenge that we're using in phase 3. And this is a new class. This is a brand new class of medications. These are neuroactive steroids that they operate on peripheral neurons. So in our noses, we have what are called chemosensory neurons. And the receptors to those neurons, when we apply through a nasal spray, and this is why our drug's a nasal spray, because these receptors are only in the nose. And so you spritz a very small amount where it's microgram levels, not even a milligram, let alone 200 milligrams, like say ibuprofen. And with 3.2 micrograms that occupy that receptor, sets in motion a series of neurotransmitters, really one interneuron, one sort of a relay station from that nasal neuron to neuron at the olfactory bulb, which is right at the base of the brain, that then projects into the amygdala. That's the main fear and anxiety center of the brain. It's not the only area associated with anxiety, but it's the main one. And there it generates an inhibitory effect on inhibitory neurotransmission effect, so to calm down quickly. So compared to, say, a benzodiazepine or an antidepressant that you take as a pill, right? As you know, orally, breakdown in your liver, your kidney, gets in your blood, cruises up to your brain, your blood-brain barrier has to cross over that. Then it has to go find the CNS neurons that you want it to deal with and hopefully avoid the ones you don't, opiates and nicotine, dopamine, those other receptors. Well, that takes a while. For a benzo, that'll take you a half hour or so. The challenge, though, with the benzos is not only the abuse potential, which the FDA pointed out in the early innings of COVID. You might have remembered Express Scripts did a report, showed like a 40% increase in benzo use. People were highly using them. So the FDA in the fall of 2020 came out with a drug safety communication specifically focused on benzos, requiring an update to the label of all of those, the benzos, because of the risk of abuse potential. So you don't want to fall asleep when you take a benzo, right? If you have to work, or function, and you certainly don't want to increase your chance of you're creating a problem worse than the one you're trying to knock down. And the duration of that effect is long. It's about a half a day for a benzo. So those are some things. While you get rapid onset, you do have some baggage you got to deal with on the other side. So what we're focusing on with PH94B is really that rapid onset benefit. That's the benzo benefit, but without all the benzo baggage. So this is a drug that is not detectable in the plasma. It's dosed at microgram levels, and it doesn't require systemic uptake, body-wide uptake, to generate this neuropsychiatric effect. We've seen this in phase 2. So the reason it's rapid is you've got only a few inches between where you're administering it and where you want it to go. So that using the nose sort of as a portal to parts of the brain associated with anxiety and depression and the neurotransmission related to that, that's the key of this class of drugs. And the ability then to start a process that doesn't even require the drug to get directly on top of CNS neurons in the brain, that's remarkable. I mean, that's fundamentally differentiated from every single drug out there. So, because when you have, when your drug does get into the brain, it has to drop onto CNS neurons. Now you never know. Could be a bit of a pinball game in there, right? You go where you want it to go to get an antidepressant effect or an anti-anxiety effect, but now where else are you going to go? Are you going to create hallucinations, sedation, dissociation, like ketamine does, for example? Tremendously fast acting and beneficial. And I'd certainly give it to my own family if we were at a suicide point, if in any reason, because it acts really quickly at low doses, about a tenth of the dose you use for anesthesia. But it will also cause side effects, right? These dissociative side effects and safety concerns, blood pressure and the like. So benzo without the baggage, I guess, is what I would say PH94B is in the anxiety arena. And anything with an acute trigger is our focus in the development strategy. And if you think about it, it's really like, say, maybe a rescue inhaler would be for asthma, right? You want to have something on demand that you can use flexibly and possibly even multiple times a day. The data we've generated so far show that the drug works in about 15 minutes in the clinical trials that have been completed, and that the duration of the effect is about an hour or so, and that we envision use up to about 4 times a day. So you may have different triggers throughout the course of the day. In the morning, you're presenting to colleagues in a classroom. At lunch, you have a job interview. At night, you have a date. There are multiple different triggers within a particular day. It's not all day, every day, and it's not even every day, but sometimes it's multiple times in a day. You have to sit on a panel, say all day. You might need to just build that confidence throughout the course of the day. Again, you're bringing someone down to normal anxiety who's living at a norm that is more than a little uncomfortable. That's how they're walking around all day, every day on these triggered situations. So.
And Shawn, it was very interesting. You know, Scott and I had the opportunity early on in our careers to work both together at a same company on a rescue inhaler. So definitely resonate with what you're saying. And also had the opportunity to work on nasal steroids. So it's really interesting in nasal administration how some patients very much appreciate the benefit of it. Some people struggle with it. But the reality is more analogous to the rescue inhaler. When people are using a medicine on an as-needed basis and they see a benefit, they tend to very much appreciate that rapid action, right? So much different than a nasal steroid where somebody is using it but may not appreciate the difference for days to weeks, even. Yeah.
These are different from classical neurosteroids. There's no androgen affinity. For example, too, as we've seen with other classical neurosteroids. So it's really the fact that the peripheral, we call it action from a distance, right? The peripheral neurons are the key here. And those are in the nasal passage, and activating those and really having them hardwired to a subgroup of neurons in the olfactory bulb is key. And there's a distinct affinity and distinct subgroup for each of the 2 chemical entities that we've got in development. The second one's for depression. So, of course, we're trying to generate with that PH10 an antidepressant effect. Is the opposite of the anti-anxiety effect. So there are different parts of the brain that that the OBN broadcasts into the amygdala, for prefrontal cortex, when norepinephrine involved. So, you've got to go to other areas of the brain to generate the norepinephrine. But it's that rapid onset without a whole slate of side effects and safety concerns that are typically associated with that systemic delivery, especially drug-drug interaction. No issues there because the liver's not involved, right? The kidney's not involved. So on the commercial side, and it's also interesting in terms of hiring, a lot of our team has been in this space for a very, very long time and dealt with some real rough drugs. Drug development CNS is challenging, not only because of placebo effect in the neuropsych arena, but just you've got a lot of potential consequences you've got to worry about.
Yeah.
Our head of commercial, our chief commercial officer, Ann Cunningham, comes to us from Otsuka on the Rexulti program, cut her teeth at Lilly with Cymbalta and a lot of the other antidepressants. Medical affairs head Ross Baker also joined us from that Rexulti program at Otsuka. So, these are folks saying, Shawn, this is the job all my other jobs prepared me for. They don't have to spend so far all day, every day, trying to figure out how to get over all the hoops and hurdles that are associated with that safety profile. So a very interesting development recently we announced from the FDA based on all the work that we've done to date, clinical and non-clinical. There just has not been any signal clinically. There certainly hasn't been any outcome preclinically of abuse liability potential. And that's key. I mean,
Yeah.
again, the drug isn't getting into the brain. We radio labeled PH94B and did some studies to see where there was exposure and maybe at picogram levels, but certainly nowhere near where you'd have any potential. And we know already there's no binding affinity to opiate, nicotine, dopamine, the steroidal hormonal receptors. So that in itself, just that part, really knocks down the potential worry wall that you could have with the CNS drug, because it lets us pivot in a lot of other directions, like let's say postpartum anxiety, where we know there are many moms, 20% of new moms. For some reason, it's not in the DSM-5 as an indication, which is crazy to me, but we'll work on that part. But not having something that has to be that you have to rely on systemic uptake, especially if you're a breastfeeding new mom. There are data saying that antidepressants are safe for breastfeeding, but if we're able to establish this drug we know it's not available in plasma. I would say it's pretty unlikely it'll be in breast milk, but we'll be doing those kinds of studies. It just lets us focus on many other indications. Sleep anxiety in the PTSD arena. We've got a study coming up with loud noise test and some biomarkers. Procedural anxiety, tremendous amount of anxiety about getting an MRI or getting any kind of medical procedure. Doctors, you probably know, John, I mean, they drop a benzo before surgery, and surgeons would love to not have something that's systemic. That provides that anxiolytic effect. So there are several other indications. We have adjustment disorder with anxieties. We have a phase 2 study going on. The phase 3 program is focused on social anxiety. But what happened with the pandemic, a lot of people who had no prior experience with anxiety disorders and depression disorders, there's a lot of flavors of adjustment disorder, but a trauma of one shape or another induced an anxiety state that persisted. And so healthcare workers, first responders, teachers, just students, people that there was a disruption in their routine. When there's a disruption in your routine combined with uncertainty, that's a bad recipe, right? That leads you to you need help. And so hopefully people are seeking that help and that their support groups are encouraging that.
Absolutely.
So, Shawn, I got to tell you that I'm experiencing something right now that I'm going to guess a lot of people that talk to you and hear this story start to experience. And that's, oh my gosh, I can see so many ways in my life, whether it's direct with me or the people around me, where something like this can be, life altering. And, I myself, 8 years ago was diagnosed with cancer, and it was related to service that I had at 9/11 as a medic at Ground Zero, and so I have associative PTSD. And every time I see a CAT scan, anxiety is it's an statement, but I'm not going to take something orally all the time because I don't like the way those things make me feel. So I just see this as so many different areas where this can really help people, even with this first indication that you're talking about. I know there's probably not, there's boundaries with what you can and can't discuss, especially since you haven't, read out your phase 3 and submitted to the FDA and everything. But this can be, uh, this can just change so many lives. So where are you in development, and what's your plan as CEO to bring this to market? Have you guys thought about, you mentioned that you have a chief commercial officer, so is this something you're going to commercialize yourself? Are you going to partner? Whatever you can share with us. I know that there's going to be a lot of people listening that say this is a company that I got to keep an eye out, because when they post jobs, I want to come work for Shawn and be part of this. So
I'll tell you what. Well, thanks for the opening on that. We have a tremendous team, and it's growing. It's grown considerably just in the last 15 months. It will continue to grow. I'll answer that second part first here. We absolutely will commercialize this on our own in the United States. We have the right talent. It might be different if we were leading with depression and following with anxiety, but here with the anxiety market as it is today, with the really the discernible population of psychiatrists, psychologists, PCPs, NPs. There's a lot of PCPs, John. We call them psych-like PCPs because they're very comfortable writing scripts for anxiety and depression. It gets a little more uncomfortable if you go up the ladder: bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, other indications, even substance abuse. Um, so we have the team. It's a stage gated approach, Scott, where it's got to be it can't be too much too soon, but it also can't be too much too late. And so we do the foundational things. We're already doing that. We have a lot of work, Anne and the team, focused on the neurobiology of fear with KOLs, educating the medical community around the MOA, the mechanism of action, the way we think the drug works. These programs are heavily science-backed and clinically supported. That's the only way to do things that are going to last and work. Hopefully, at the end of the day, it's the composite framing of this opportunity through everything that's been done supports us putting an NDA down near the end of 23 based on the ongoing, we call it the Palisade phase 3 program, which we have 2 phase 3 studies reading out this year. And if they are successful, those will be hopefully the 2 adequate, well-controlled studies to support the NDA. As we hit development and regulatory milestones along the way, that hockey stick starts to go pretty sharply up, especially on the other side of a second phase 3, where then what's left: long-term safety, other collateral studies to support the program. And at the end of the day, we'll probably be somewhere around. Depends on how telehealth advances. That's going to be something interesting for us to keep an eye on, and whether docs like you, John, even want to see reps. But if it's sort of a hybrid of the old school way and what we see emerging, we'll probably end up somewhere around 500 field sales reps, a pretty solid MSL force, a typical leadership base that geographically is appropriate and systematically laid out. But all of that done at the pace that's warranted with the progress, with a little bit of risk ahead. Not too much, because you can't sit back flat-footed. With a
yeah.
market potential, as you noted, for something like this, it's enormous. And that's what's so exciting about doing this job all day, every day. The best privileges is to see the potential applications of something that has a product profile like this. We've done a lot of work already on market attributes. We just finished a conjoined analytical model where we went out to 125 psychiatrists and 125 PCPs, 250 overall, with 81 market attributes. And that kind of study, you have to make your way through the same association of different responses to get the end of the day. Well, 3 of the top 4 out of those 81 hit our product profile for this asset. So that's very encouraging. Discussions with payers already have begun in that profiling. So all the pregame activity you'd expect, maybe just a little bit more, but not a reckless amount more, has been underway. And we've mapped this out, multiple chess moves way downstream. If we're successful, as we hope, its potential will have this drug, if phase 3 is successful, that it could be in the market by the end of 24. So not too far
Wow.
away. But back to what you first started with, Scott, the exciting part of this is that the common goal we have as a company is to really change the trajectory of global mental health, right? And we say one mind at a time, because that's the way you have to do it. And the ability for drug candidates to fit the growing need, the general need for everything, is we need to know now, right? We need to get it now. But in mental health, I think more than really many other areas, you do need it now. Because if something isn't working, you really have to pivot. And you have to figure out how you get to your solution sooner than later. Because getting to the solution is risky. What could happen in between visits? It's scary, especially with suicidal ideation. And you have, even between really effective, say, ketamine, low dose IV ketamine treatments, the window between treatments is where you're worried. What happens there if they can't, especially among veterans and others, what if they can't get access? So having something that we think can help knock down anxiety on demand, that's what is not approved right now by the FDA. There is no acute treatment of anxiety in adults with social anxiety disorder. And we fully envision moving to pediatric population development as soon as we see some success with the adults. That's a typical pattern, as you might remember from your days. So once parents see some success in an adult potentially pivotal study, it helps to enroll and execute those studies. We've already submitted our pediatric study plan, because sometimes with this disorder, the dots are connected backward. So unfortunately, it's someone who will present with depression or present with substance abuse, and they'll look backward and say, boy, it was that sequence of years and trauma in high school, in middle school, that I didn't realize is what's led me to this. So we need to be able to raise awareness, and the diagnosed and untreated population's pretty big. Overall population, about 23 million in the US. There's about 11 million who are diagnosed. Of that, only about 5.5 million are treated. And for those who are diagnosed but untreated, they have a lot of reasons. Like you said, why take something chronically if I need this episodically? But others too, we need to be able to preempt their arrival at your office because of substance abuse challenges or depression, right? We need to get to those social anxiety triggers early and be able to knock them down, because every time you're successful in muscling through something that you think is a trigger, right? And you come out on the other side of that job interview and you know what? I'm actually okay. Next time you have a job interview or next time you have a date, slowly, incrementally, it builds over time. If you connect that real life success with an explanation in your talk therapy as to why that might have led you to that feeling, and if the medication will allow you to embrace that talk therapy better in the first place, it's a really nice recipe for success as we see it. So
Yeah, I think Scott hit
there'll be
it.
a lot of uses.
Yeah, I think Scott hit it on the head that, it's obvious why there would be a lot of excitement for a drug like this, or for the pipeline for that matter. There is no drug that I've met yet that's an entirely a slam dunk. Where do you see the biggest challenges? What does VistaGen have to sort out?
Well, you just have to continue to do the necessary blocking and tackling, of course, from a regulatory perspective. And at the same time, be mindful what has to be part of the narrative if and when it does get to the back end. So there are multiple things we can do today. Like we did a study that showed that the drug doesn't potentiate GABA, which is what benzos do. So everything that we can do to hopefully not have a scenario at the end of the day where there's anything in section 9 of the label that causes a PCP, that there's no black box. If you are at the end of the day and you're looking at it and you see there's no black box, well, you're not going to be thinking about abuse liability. So we have to make sure we do what's necessary from a medical education standpoint, to really make it clear what we believe the mechanism of action is, why the pharmacology is unique. But at the same time, we have very well designed, we think, phase 3 studies that are based upon the phase 2 consensus, phase 2 results and the consensus we reached with the FDA. There's a public speaking challenge in our phase 3 program, where we're assessing against a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled group, how people perform on or off the medication in a blinded way. And that, again, do what the FDA says. Don't try to do what the FDA says you shouldn't do. That's kind of silly.
Yeah.
And really, what's wonderful about the FDA, I think, is it's been clear they do realize that there's a mental health crisis. They do realize benzos are worrisome. They wouldn't have put out the drug safety communication. And the pandemic has certainly raised alarm bells about the need for new treatment alternatives that can change the current standard of care, because the numbers continue to get worse before they're getting better in any of these indications that are anxiety or depression related. So again, just we are very interactive with the FDA. It's very clear what we have to do, doing it. Fortunately, we've got a very strong and supportive group of long biased investors, which is critical to success in this space, as you all know, combined with a really incredible team of people and a regulatory clarity that allows us to execute on the roadmap that's been laid out for this phase 3 program several years ago.
It's interesting, and I know we're getting close to our closing time here, but if I am the FDA, and I'm not, but if I was the FDA and the data that you're talking about, is what's available to me, and in the current setting that we're in society, where we know, I mean, we see it every day that mental health is lacking tremendously in America. We see these tragedies every day with things that go on the news. There's no question. Um, I would be trying to give you every tool that you needed from us to make sure that this was something that had a crystal clear path. So I'm just going to say that I hope that's what's going on, because this really seems promising. It seems promising from a patient perspective tremendously, and thinking like that, I think that I would be surprised if you brought this to market and you didn't have specialties outside of the ones that you mentioned. Even looking at this, like immediately what comes to mind is oncology. There's a lot of scanxiety and depression and anxiety that comes along with that diagnosis, and there's so many other medications that are having to be used that you can't use, like some of the ones that are affected by CYP and different metabolism channels. So it just, a lot comes to mind. So I really hope that you're able to get there from a patient's perspective, and from the perspective of where a lot of our audience is coming from, opportunity, and we always ask people what's next, what's the next big thing, and this is really exciting. Whether we have a lot of folks that listen from the medical affairs side and that are in that world, and it seems like that's where maybe there's some opportunities to connect with you now, and then completely from the commercial side. I mean, I couldn't think as a middle manager, if you will, as a like a regional director type position. I mean, building a team to bring something like this to market seems amazing, and I hope for everybody involved that this comes to fruition. I think it's a great opportunity, and I want to say thank you as somebody again who's been on both sides of the table. What you bring into market is really needed.
Well, thanks, Scott. No question about it. we've had a very good relationship with the FDA. They are an incredibly smart and hardworking group who they don't make you do things that are clinically irrelevant or scientifically, um, you know, not dispositive of anything. So the FDA has been very sensible and very collaborative. We've got fast track designation already. We'll
Great.
see how the phase 3 goes. Hopefully, we can elevate this up to breakthrough if we see that, because it certainly is serious and life threatening scenarios with a paucity of options. And if that happens, the best case would be getting priority review. On the other side, you don't always get it with breakthrough, but
Yeah.
hopefully we could try, and that's an 8-month cycle. In terms of the corporate growth, we're moving from clinical stage to commercial. It's been done very successfully, and Biohaven just did it. Pfizer just bought Biohaven. Um, and some of their past I see is our prologue. We have think about the Nurtec commercial. Um, I would hope similar to the type of commercial we would have for this drug based on what we've seen in the clinic so far. Not 50 seconds of what you need to worry about, maybe a little bit of that. But we also don't have AbbVie, next to us when we get into the market. So it's a different commercial dynamic for this particular indication. I think the need is great. We'll certainly be staffing, continue to staff up. It's an exciting time because it's not just the commercial side. There are other areas that always need to be fortified. When you move up, your IT infrastructure changes, everything in the finance department changes. You've got enhanced regulatory needs, enhanced CMC needs. But we will, as I told you, we will go it alone in the United States, especially because we have PH10 entering phase 2B as a potential standalone therapy for MDD, for major depressive disorder. Completely different from what's out there currently. We think we can see some data, some benefits, as we saw in phase 2A, well within a week of onset, without all the typical side effects and safety concerns you see. So that follows as another asset into the pipeline. But that commercial organization itself becomes an asset on a standalone basis for those who don't want to develop that but fit into the channels that we're moving into. So it's a really exciting time, and we'll keep pushing at it. Like I said, there's no one size fits all in this, which provides a lot of room for a lot of success, and even a very modest penetration in these numbers has profound commercial implications on the back end. So if you help people, you know how that works. It takes the financial and commercial side takes care of itself. I'm delighted by the long bias investor base that we've got, the balance sheet strength that we've got, and these are, fortunately, with the fact that these are fast-acting studies with very safe profiles so far, they're not that expensive to run, and they don't take that long to actually fully randomize and complete. So keep your eyes out. We have an aggressive LinkedIn presence. Our HR department is fully focused on lots of different needs we have over time, and I'm sure there's some fabulous candidates out there that would fit really nicely within our family here.
Well,
Awesome,
I'm
Shawn.
sold. Yeah. Thank you,
that's
Shawn.
great. So I just had one final question as we wrap up. A lot of people who join our podcast, the term biotech project is certainly the title of the podcast, but we also refer to it as people's career, right? What's your personal biotech project? So as we wrap up, again, thank you so much for being with us today. This was incredible. It was awesome. And I wish you and the team all the success, because I really hope you're able to deliver on this concept, because I think it'll help tons and tons of people. But maybe you could give a few words to our listeners about those people who aspire one day to move into a CEO role. What should their biotech project look like?
Yeah. Embrace early on that it's not a straight 45-degree angle to get from where you are to where you want to go. It's ridiculously serendipitous. But you have to persevere. You have to have hope. Hope is critical. That's one of the things that I would hope is a hallmark of my own character. That comes out of my brush up in the ICU for a couple of weeks. And you have to be positive, and you have to think about what you're trying to do on the other side. It's not always just for investors. It certainly is for investors, and you can never shake that part. But if there isn't a patient focused mindset from the very beginning, and I don't care whether it's a rare disease, I don't care if it's a primary care condition, you have to have that perspective in mind. And fortunately and unfortunately, the fortunate part is on this one, that's easy to accomplish because most of us have had some direct or indirect real life experience with these indications that we're trying to knock down and help people with. But that kind of a patient focused perspective is key. And you're going to hear way more no's. I mean, you got Hall of Fame hitters hitting 300, so they're failing 7 out of 10 times, and you just simply have to keep at it because that you see up here behind me, I take that from Coach Taylor from Friday Night Lights. Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. It's true. So you have to stick at it, and eventually it'll get there.
Very true.
There was a time of this company where we had less than $1,000 in the bank.
Wow.
And it was my credit card paying the energy bills. So you really have to be. You just have to be confident in what you're doing and be persistent and persevere, and you'll get there.
Well, good for you.
I will say, Shawn, you mentioned something that when I speak to CEOs, and I've spoken to some awesome, fantastic CEOs, and some that I feel a little different. But one of the things in 2000, the CEO of Merck here in the U.S. made a statement when he was talking about how the company was going to evolve and be successful. And what he said was that his philosophy is to focus on high quality patient outcomes and focusing on the patient. And he said if they did that, he was very confident success would follow. And I believe so much in that. And you basically said that a few moments ago. So Congratulations on everything that you guys have done, Shawn. And thanks for spending this time with us.
Well, and back at you two as well, because it's not always the case that we get opportunities to raise awareness about these challenges out there. So that you focused on it and that you're on it is tremendous credit to you topically for being interested and aware. And we appreciate it from our side too. So thanks to that, and enjoyed my time, and happy to talk to you anytime.
Great. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
You bet.
And for everybody that's listening, make sure you jump onto our website where we'll have Shawn's profile and information on VistaGen. And, if you haven't looked at them yet, you absolutely should be. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. Have a great day.
You've been listening to the Biotech Project. Scott and John have 50 years of combined expertise with roles that have covered everything from frontline sales to senior vice president of medical affairs. Scott and John are industry veterans, equipping you with knowledge from guests in every role from CEO to sales, recruiters to hiring managers. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten some useful and practical information. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, check out the website at www.thebiotechproject.com. And for questions and comments, send an email to hosts@thebiotechproject.com. See you next time.